Hey, everybody. I'm Judah Phillips from Squark. Thank you for joining us today. I'm honored and privileged today that we have Jake Collins, who's the Director of Marketing Intelligence at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, otherwise known as UPMC, here today to talk to us about the exciting programs that he's leading around data analytics and data science. Um, without further ado, please allow me to introduce Jake. Jake, thank you for joining. I'd love to learn more about you, your background, and how you arrived at UPMC.
Sure. So, I did my education at Carnegie Mellon in two very kind of data analytics intensive programs, and honestly have been at UPMC for the intervening 15 years since. I worked across three different teams: our strategic planning team, which is really focused on merger and acquisition activity within our very large health system. How docs are resourced and sort of those types of things. Where do we have extra capacity? Where do we need capacity? Then I moved over to our international division. I had the privilege of working with 27 different countries in 5 years. So I got a crash course in what does healthcare data and data policy look like in other places. Before moving over to the role that I'm in now, which is the director of our marketing intelligence group, where I'm responsible basically for all of our marketing analytics, but increasingly for more and more business intelligence questions. In a lot of cases, the amount of data that resides in the marketing department these days is resulting in them being leveraged across all types of organizations for very interesting and neat types of analyses. Just to kind of give you a sense of scope and scale, I have access to about 14 billion rows of data sitting inside our data platform Domo today. So certainly a very large sandbox to play in and to use tools like Squark to help us do some really interesting analyses.
Very cool. Yeah, definitely a big data environment with a lot of complexity, especially given the global nature of UPMC and the regulations that you fall under, both from privacy and compliance perspective around PHI and PII. And working with you, I know that you are the go-to guy for any question about those 14 billion rows of data. Would you tell us a little bit more about some of the current projects you're working on? What's on the mind of an organization like UPMC? What are some of the initiatives that you're moving forward this year
Sure,
on that data set?
yeah, absolutely. There are always questions about, where is there opportunity for our organization to grow? So obviously, always we're doing different types of market analyses, and then once we've determined there's an opportunity, really digging into how do we target some of those opportunities, which, as you well know, and we'll talk a little bit more, is kind of where Squark fits in. But also increasingly questions around, staffing. We're short on nurses. There's a national nursing crunch. So how do we find and target nurses? What do those people look like? What messages will resonate? Working very closely with our finance team to look at some ROI models and that type of things, cost per acquisition for patients. Another Squark related project, we're always looking at our media mix. So trying to understand which channels, when we put them together, are most effective. For an organization at our size, we use a lot of different channels. So it's really what's the right mix, and is that mix different for, different particular types of campaigns where we want to reach out to people.
Very cool. So you're touching not just the patient and the customer data, but you're touching transactional, you're touching financial data, you're touching labor and workforce data. So your charter at UPMC, despite the marketing intelligence within your title, is a much larger, as you mentioned, BI, analytical, and data science charter. And you have a
Yeah.
team too. Tell us maybe a bit about your team and how that team is structured.
Sure. So I've got, five full-time employees underneath me, all of whom have strong analytical backgrounds. And then we leverage a series of vendors. So I have a lot of data science experts who I can kind of tap at outside organizations. We call them integrators. So really their focus is on how are we using our tools? How are we using some of our data? And it's nice because for what the cost is to have a couple of full-time employees, I can leverage a variety of different types of experts in various types of data and analyses. It kind of gives us a bench to go to when we have questions. I will say that most of my team really aren't data scientists, right? I mean, yes, they have strong analytical backgrounds, but they're not the type of people who are frequently coding in Python or writing SaaS models or those types of things. And so the fact that we have tools that we can use like Squark that really simplify some of those types of analyses and put that really powerful analytic in the hands of, I won't call them an uneducated user, but certainly not someone who's gone to school for 2 decades to do data science, and have them run those same types of models it's been invaluable for us in terms of the power of the analyses we can conduct and sort of the value that we can contribute back to our organization.
That's awesome to hear. And thank you for sharing that about the team. I always like to say, 5 ± 2 is about the right number of direct reports. And I know some organizations, like Google field much more and some like less. So it's interesting to hear how you guys have structured, and also the fact that, you have a budget to work with, external vendors who can essentially act as spokes and additional resources to help you deliver against your, sustaining ad hoc and backlog work. That's very cool to know. And additionally, as you know, Jake, and for those folks who are maybe new to Squark or still unclear as to exactly what we do, we built Squark for a team like yours. That doesn't preclude data scientists from using Spark, and we certainly have those users as well. But we oriented the platform around people who have analytical prowess. They have data dexterity. They understand data and KPIs, in trends and dimensions and measures and things that in analytics. But those people may not necessarily have had the time to learn Python or had the time to deeply explore the algorithms. And so we've simply created a capability where you can connect to that data, have it clean, prepared, and engineered, and then auto-modeled in a way it creates explainable and fair models that scores, individual predictions and forecasts to answer those business questions. So it's great to see how well it has fit into what you're doing at UPMC over the time that we work together. So really thrilled to hear that. And you spoke a little bit about Domo, and Domo is one of our partners. We love Domo. We're big Domo fans. We have been for a long time. They're having Domo Palooza soon, and wish it were out in Salt Lake again and we could all get together. But we'll settle for virtual again this year. Hopefully in 2023 that'll be different. But tell us a little bit more about we talked a bit about the data, but tell us more about the data you use. Some of these architectures that you've created. Domo must sit on top of core sources. We'd love to hear about that. Tell us a bit about that data and data architecture.
Absolutely. I think one of the things I'm most excited about, Domo about is that they are like a great data integration product. So we pull data from our finance systems, from different types of patient records. We've got a proprietary database of about 1,500 variables on 250 million individuals that we call our consumer database. And that is nice because for us, that doesn't have HIPAA protections like our patient data does. So because that's all purchased third-party data, we can sort of use that as we want, develop targeting models and that sort of thing. In addition, we pull in all kinds of data from our HR sources, from our various marketing stack vendors like our web analytics, which sit in Google Analytics, all those types of things. So really kind of the neat thing is the ability, and the most interesting analyses occur when we cross those data sets, right? Using, as we've talked about with LDLT in the past, the consumer data to sort of try to predict those patients who might need a liver transplant, or using some of the things that we're seeing in the HR data set to predict which nurses are really thinking about maybe leaving or transitioning to another job, and how do we reach out to those groups and curate them. All of those sort of different types of things where it's taking data from one system, marrying it to another system, and then trying to find the power of the connections between those data is really, I think, where some of the most powerful analyses come from.
Very cool. So your approach is a sort of a data integration approach where you're bringing in, now do you use Epic, Cerner?
We
both?
actually use both. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. When we first started down the path of EHR, and I think we were really one of the first organizations to do that, there was a significant benefit for Cerner inpatient and Epic outpatient. 20 years later, those have sort of disappeared. They've caught up to one another. But we bought one for each setting and actually commercialized a company that allowed them to talk to each other. And so that's sort of the basis of our solution was we need both. Now we're thinking about transitioning fully to one, which creates its own problems for IT folks. But for those of us who have kind of always been looking to get the richness out of those electronic health records, it was really interesting to be able to play with both. And our tools are actually one of the few that really allow those systems to talk to each other and to do some analyses that's kind of based on both our inpatient and outpatient records.
Very cool. So you're taking inpatient and outpatient records, you're taking web behavioral data, you're taking census level, like a person level identity graph, and the variables that we know about people in the United States. Could be their favorite color, the type of cars they drive, whether they go on vacation at the beach, right? And you're bringing it all together.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you're graphics. I was just going to say, yeah, all of that kind of stuff, as well as we survey. So we collect first-party data on people who are in our region, and we actually use the depth of our survey. We survey about 100,000 people to predict the sentiments and the preferences of the other 4 million people in the Western Pennsylvania region. And so we apply that back into the data set, and that's yet another series of kind of first-party data that we can pull from.
That's amazing. Yeah, that data integration approach with Domo on top, right? Bringing that together without necessarily having to do a lot of coding with Domo either. Certainly you can, similar to Squark, you'd simply connect to your data sources, do your ETL, prepare your data sets. And then where Squark comes in is we pick up that data from Domo or from other sources and can model and forecast, those different outcomes that you're looking to understand to better drive your marketing, your performance. That's super cool. Beyond Domo, Cerner, Epic, that third-party database that you've created, Google Analytics, are there any other tools that you found really helpful within your tenure at UPMC so far that you couldn't live without, besides of course Squark Domo?
Well, I was going to say, Squark jumps to mind just because y'all have such a great interface that's really easy to use, I think, and for the types of analyses that we want to conduct. There are other visualization tools that we have used kind of ad hoc as needed. But honestly, those two are kind of the mainstay of how we spend our time.
That's incredible. Yeah. And as we're super honored to be able to participate in your grand vision and what you guys are achieving there. And just love the results. And we'll talk about those a little later in the call. I'd love to know, what are the types of use cases you're working on? It could be around integration, business questions you're answering. It could be around prediction. Help us get a sense of when you go and you have to deliver to your stakeholders, or there are new questions that come up. What are those that are on your mind today?
Sure. So, obviously one of them is targeted marketing, right? Increasingly, marketers are being asked to do more with less, particularly at an organization like ours. I like to say it's not even like we're looking for a needle in a haystack. We're looking for a needle in a stack of needles, but it's a very specific needle. And how do you figure out which one's which, right? And we use a lot of that consumer data to really help us build advanced predictive models to look for specific groups of patients. One of the examples, that we like to fall back on is what we've done with living donor liver transplant, where really, we had started out kind of messaging about 10,000 people, which was already a significant sort of cut down from what the just broadband marketing would be in order to identify one patient who likely had liver disease. What we're able to do is take some of that consumer data, apply some machine learning models, and using a differentially preferred privacy model so that we never touch any HIPAA data. We're like 2 arms lengths away. Compare that to what the outcomes are at a regional level for liver disease. And that actually let us get down to about 1 in 75, which is obviously for a marketer, that's a huge win. Our clinical analytics group would not be as excited about a patient predictive model that was right 1 in 75 times. But when you're a marketer and you're going from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 75, it really lets you stretch what you're able to do with those dollars and do other things. Increasingly, we're interested in other types of predictive modeling, looking at seasonality. There's, believe it or not, a ton of seasonality in healthcare. You would think demand is pretty flat, but it's really not. Certain services you see during the vacation months and during the holidays, people actually stay healthier. They don't come in as much. So how do we sort of prepare from a capacity standpoint for those types of rushes? How do we schedule OR time? How do we kind of solve all of those sorts of problems? So there are any number of things that you can kind of look at with some machine learning models that would really help us kind of advance the state of how we're delivering care, if you will.
Definitely. And I've always been a fan, obviously having worked and co-founded the company, about, being predictive and prescriptive in your approaches, right? That can augment the descriptive and the diagnostic analysis that we do. It's really heartening, the use cases that you deliver at UPMC with our software. We tell our families at dinners, and we're proud of the work that you've achieved, and that we've been a bit a part of. Just to communicate again to the audience, what you were saying is that prior to leveraging machine learning through Squark to find somebody to participate in a living liver donation, LDT, you would have to email essentially 10,000 people or reach out to them. And with Squark, you've reduced that to 75. Mm-hmm. So, for the marketers on the call, that's the type of efficiencies that we're talking about. Going from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 75, that's a 99.9% improvement. And given that, what what have been some of the, downstream outcomes, if you will? Has that increased surgical bookings? Has that driven more revenue? Has that, saved, certain costs that allow you to allocate and do more with less, since this is done for you?
Sure, you've got it. So from the organizational side, obviously, it's led to an uptick in volume, right? There are more people coming through the evaluation clinics. There are more people being transplanted. Obviously, that has downstream effects on our revenue as an organization, as well as, honestly, our kind of standing. We actually invented solid organ transplant here at UPMC. And so that's a thing we hang our hat on. So anytime that we can grow those programs, right, it has benefits to kind of that halo effect of who we are as an organization. Within the marketing department, obviously, that was a high organizational priority. So not only are we saying, yes, we were successful in delivering against the organizational priorities, but we did so on a much tighter budget than we thought, which allows us to redeploy those resources to other places and makes us more effective, right? Instead of doing one of those a year, I can look at doing 4, 5, or 6 of those types of really targeted programs a year, and really, deliver value on that with about 1/10 of the budget as I would have, otherwise.
Right, absolutely. And then without any incremental headcount resource, investment as well, right? Having to bring in engineers and data scientists to do that modeling or third parties.
Exactly.
So,
Once upon a time, that would have taken a ton of people and a ton of time and a ton of money. And now we're able to deliver that on, what I would call a relatively inexpensive model, right? Using the software that we have and the same headcount that we already possess.
yeah, and if I recall correctly, it was about 6 months to do this, and then with Spark, a couple days, a day or so.
You've got it right. So a lot of that
Yeah.
was really putting the pieces together and kind of figuring some things out. And now, we can run those models in an afternoon, or if we want to refresh it, it's kind of set on lock. You just push a button and take the new model results and activate against those.
It's awesome. It's really heartening to hear. And so it's great to be able to drive people to click through campaigns, to download white papers and fill out forms. It's a whole other thing when you know that click through and that action is helping to improve and save a life. So just thrilled to hear those results. And I know that we only can really publicly talk about one of the programs, but I know there's been success in others, and there's other use cases that we're engaged in that I really think help UPMC continue to be the amazing healthcare provider and institution that it is. I'd love to know, Jake, like, you're at the cutting edge. I've known you to be one of the smartest guys I know in analytics. Somebody who could think through this in the early days, when I was telling you about this, and you got it, you understood it, and over the years you've been able to put it together and bring it to life. Not everybody is as risk tolerant, and will take a bet on new technology and can follow it through in a large organization to deliver ROI, especially over multiple quarters and years like you've done. What brought you to AI? Why did you start to seek out these sort of newer ways of operating that and truly break new ground in healthcare?
So, some of that goes back to the vision of our CMO, right? Like, he really wanted to build a data forward marketing organization here. We'd always done things very well traditionally. Obviously, we'd experienced a ton of growth, but he really wanted to say, like, what's the future? And so he built out a lot of the machinery to engage folks digitally, which is kind of what you have to do to leverage some of these kind of one-to-one messaging models. And so that was all in place when I got here. And honestly, I was really brought on with that charter, which was go do some science for science sake. I mean, figure it out, apply new tools, apply new models, make us different than our competitors. And so that was a focus that I came with. And honestly, it was a discussion with y'all where, I was shocked at the value proposition that you guys offer, which was, let's decrease the cost of doing some of these kinds of things. So suddenly, not only an organization, obviously, which has enough funds to do it any way they want, like ours, but smaller organizations could leverage these same types of tools and analyses. And for someone like us, it meant that the cost of delivering got low enough that I could almost take a spaghetti at the wall approach, right? Like, let's build a bunch of models and just see what works, because the cost of the analytic has now become low enough that there's less fear of failure. It used to be, if you were going to invest the time and the money and the resources in these types of things, you better know pretty well that there was something at the end of the tunnel that you were going to be able to leverage. And now it doesn't have to be, right? We can chase hunches, which is, I think, part of the reason why I get interested in new models and new tools and new ways of doing things, because it provides my staff the opportunity to stretch their legs and be curious and see what might be out there. And I think that's kind of where the bulk of innovation comes in analytics.
100%. Yeah, and that's it's fundamental to the reason why we invented this. When I started and my co-founder started to think about the problem we were solving for, we realized that these capabilities were only in the hands of the most sophisticated, the most well-moneyed companies with, you know, huge investment in technology and just headcount. And we wanted to provide something that, you know, anybody who wanted to deliver prediction and forecasting, to apply data science to data, could do in clicks. And, you know, that's essentially what we've done. And the idea being that the capability that, you know, you work with is world class. You know, it's one of the most sophisticated machine learning AI systems on the planet, hands down, compared to any unicorn, decacorn, or existing platform. But our goal, our mantra, was to bring that to everybody. We didn't just want, you know, it to be locked into a particular platform or something that could only be afforded by the largest companies in the world. Knowing UPMC is one of those that can afford to work with anything. The economics that we bring to the table, I think, are why, you know, people continue to invest in us, and then the results and the return are why they continue to double down and grow. And it's also really good to hear in your summary the importance of having a leader who's bought in, not just at your level, but even at the C level, who understands, you know, these things, realizes that to compete with analytics, you know, you must apply machine learning and data science, and then gives you the charter to be able to explore, you know, make mistakes, be successful, test things out, and then reach the point where you're, you know, providing some significant return to the hospital on their investments there. So I congratulate you on that. It's really impressive to us. You know, it's great when your boss says, you know, hey, go and do it, right? And, you know, you get some budget and you go and do it. But there's all these other people in the organization too, your team, your peers, other stakeholders, your boss's peers, and especially in a large globally matrix organization like UPMC. Imagine you touch a lot of different groups and work with a lot of people. What were some of the ways that you got buy-in from those stakeholders, whether it's on your team to introduce a new technology, to your peers to say you're doing this, or perhaps to your boss's peers as they ask you questions and want to learn more about that? How do you think of it?
You know, I think part of it is always education, right? You've got to explain to people what it is that you want to do, where you're trying to go, what you're chasing. And doing that is certainly incredibly helpful. But you've also got to make it, you know, you got to put the carrot in front of them, right? Kind of what's in it for some of those other groups. So, you know, as we think about looking at ROI models, what I'm pitching to the finance folks is I can get more bang for our buck if I better understand what the ROI behind things is, right? When you're out there and you're trying to convince the head of a program that I'm going to spend less marketing this than I initially did, and I'm not going to go do, you know, a huge TV buy, to them, that sounds like a bad thing, right? But what you're really saying is, I'm going to do this in a highly targeted way so that when your phone rings, instead of it being a whole bunch of chatter for people who may or may not need this, you're going to know that you've got pre-qualified leads, right? Not everybody's going to be a perfect candidate, but I'm going to decrease the amount of work that it takes your staff to do to kind of chase down and evaluate some of those patients. So it's really about understanding the give and take and pitching it to them in a way where they can see the value that it adds for them. It's easier, obviously, when you're talking to other folks who do analytics and they natively understand what it is that you're going to get. But I think that's really what it is explaining the deep value and being able to explain the models in a way that is comfortable for people who don't understand analytics, maybe to the depth that someone like you or I does. I think that's how you really drive value, and you get collaboration that way.
Yeah, 100%. You know, in talking to companies and you know, helping to enable other companies, what I've learned is precisely what you just said, that you have to tie it to how it's going to impact somebody today or in the near term. And you want to tie to that business value, you know, whether it's increased efficiency, it's, you know, reduced cost, it's, you know, margin improvement, it's, you know, net new profitable revenue, you know, putting it in the vernacular, the vocabulary, the financial terms that people need to understand it from a business perspective has been very helpful. When I go and I talk about more esoteric things like feature engineering or feature selection or, you know, XGBoost or, you know, decomposing seasonality and trend, and a lot of time, which we do in the time series forecasting, just so you know, Jake, with that reference to seasonality before, including anomaly and outlier detection. When I start talking about that stuff, it can go over people's heads. Not that they can't understand it, it's just it's new. They haven't been exposed to it. So I found it when promoting and getting buy-in for AI and ML to do exactly what you said, to focus on those use cases, to focus on that value, and to tie it to reality. whether it's better than an Abacus, whether it's better than a TI-85, we can have those discussions, right? And we'll figure that out. But for most people, they really don't care that much. They want to know, how is it going to impact them? How's it going to drive value today? What are the use cases? And I know, Jake, I would talk to you for the next 5 hours if I could. But we only have a few more minutes left. We talked a bit about the results. You saw from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 75, from 6 months to 1 day. Significant increase. I think it was a 50% incremental lift in surgical bookings, and thousands of percent in freed up budget. Anything else you want to talk about those results?
I think the other thing is really like the result of giving my team the confidence to go chase other hunches. We didn't know this would work, right? So that's the intangible benefit, is that now there's there's a little bit of shine there, right? You understand what you've done, what you've been able to achieve, and that lets you go try other wild things. And when you come back, people are more inclined to believe you because they've seen the success of doing these types of things once or twice, right? And there are other pockets of our organization who are doing similar things. So it's always really interesting to kind of leverage what the other groups are doing and be able to talk about these types of things. And you start to build excitement in the organization for data literacy, for analytics, for those types of things. And that just makes the job easier and gives you a bigger sandbox to play in, right? So I think that's the other piece is, start with small use cases, find some wins, and get yourself basically the room to run and do bigger and better things.
It's a really good point. And the fact that that's, it's enlarging people's jobs, it's adding additional motivation. And they're learning about this new thing, AI and ML, that's right on the cutting edge. And they're learning about it in the right context, right? At work, driving value. Very cool. It's one of the things I love about, what we do, is that I'm constantly learning too as we build this out. To be sensitive to everybody's time, any lessons that you've learned, to share with the crowd right at the end. And then I'll see if we have any questions here. There was a few that came in, and I'll just probably ask one given the time.
Sure.
Yeah, but tell us any lessons learned, Jake.
I'd say the first one is understand that it's a process, right? It takes time. Even at an experienced organization like ours with tons of resources, you're not going to turn around and do this tomorrow, and you probably don't want to, right? You've got to make sure that the data is sort of ready. You've got to make sure you understand what models you're going to build. You've got to communicate and get buy-in from the various executive audiences. So give yourself the time to kind of do that in the runway. The other is, don't be afraid to start small. Everybody kind of wants to focus on big data, and here I am talking about the 14 billion rows of data that I have access to. But at the same time, some of the most valuable insights can come from small, very well understood, nuanced analyses that don't require a ton of data. So I think that's the other piece, is don't be afraid to do those types of things, because there's a ton of value hiding in those smaller data sets.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we built the software to be able to do small data and big data. And the idea being that, there are questions that you can answer with the data you have available today. You don't necessarily need to go and integrate, over a long time like you have done to start making progress. Of course, that type of architecture helps and allows you to run faster and do more, but you can start smaller too. And that's an excellent lesson. I know we're just a little over. I got a couple questions here on the chat, but let me ask this one, because I think this is an important one. And you referenced it before. How do you do all this with, protecting patient confidentiality, PHI, in those concerns?
Sure. So part of that is just what data we feed into the model, right? We'll strip out any identifying information if we're looking at patient data. That's one big piece. Another big piece is the Domo, our visualization platform and data storage, all fully HIPAA compliant. So that's another component of it. And the third is the types of models that we use. So I don't use your individual line of healthcare data to predict who you are. I look at regions. So I'll say, in this zip code, kind of how many were there, and what are the demographics differences between this zip code where there are 5 and this one where there are none. And from that, we can do some feature selection. So it's not even as if I'm looking at an individual's health record, right? I'm really looking at regional health data, almost like I'm an epidemiologist. So there are a whole bunch of different tools and ways that you can do that. And I'll tell you, we tend to err to the side of caution, right? Our data governance and data protection team, they probably get tired of the phone ringing when I call them to ask them, can we do this? Is this okay? And they're like, yeah, you guys you're pretty far away from where the line is. So we try to stay there, but there are a whole bunch of different ways that, you can go about doing that.
Awesome. Thank you. And I appreciate the attendee who asked that question. In the interest of time, I'm going to call it a webinar. Jake, thank you for spending some of your valuable time with us and sharing the experience. Like I said, you are on the absolute cutting edge. You're a leader in the space. We love working with you, and we're so proud of what you do and how we play a small part in helping to really improve and save people's lives. Thank you for your time today. And I look forward to talking to you again on the phone soon for some more sparking.
Sounds good. Thanks. We appreciate
right.
you guys. You're great.
Thank you, sir. All right, everybody, thank you for attending. Feel free to reach out to Squark if you have any questions about our technology, or if you'd like to speak with Jake, we're happy to connect you as well. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.